Hi, fifth graders. We are ready for lesson 86 in science, and we're going to talk about second class levers. So last time we talked about first class, and that's where the effort and the load are on opposite ends, and the fulcrum is in between them. It's not necessarily end and end. It could be closer, but the point is that the fulcrum is between the two. That's what classifies it as a first class lever. So we're going to talk about second class lever. And you may notice, I'm going to put a science max on here. Some people say it levers, some say it levers. I always learned it levers, so you can say it either way. So remember, levers are bars that pivot on a fixed support called a fulcrum. And if the fulcrum is between the load and the effort, it is first class, like I just said. Okay, and it takes less effort to move the load the closer it is to the fulcrum. So like we said, if you put something heavy, if it's closer to the fulcrum, it's going to be much easier to lift it than if it's far away. Okay, so I am on page 7 in paragraph 3. So please follow along and highlight if you're able to. So a second class lever has the load between the fulcrum and the effort. When the load is closer to the fulcrum and farther from the effort, less effort is needed to move the load. Okay, so it's the same kind of situation. It takes less effort the closer the load is to the fulcrum, but in this case, the load is between the fulcrum and the effort. Okay, so that's what makes it a second class lever. So at the beginning of the first sentence, you're going to highlight the words second class lever. Okay, and then to remember what that means in the first sentence, also highlight the words load between. So the first class had the fulcrum between the load and effort. This has the load between the fulcrum and the effort. Okay, and then we would have made a second class lever, but we're not going to get to do that right now. So let me skip down here. Goodness, I had a lot of stuff to do. Okay, so there should be space in your booklet below paragraph 3 to draw a diagram of a second class lever. Okay, so it's pretty much the same. Let me see, I think there's a way to do a whiteboard. Oh, maybe not on this. I'll have to show you in Zoom if I'm able to later. But basically, remember I said it's like the first class lever, you have a straight line, and you have the fulcrum in the middle, a load, and an effort. Okay, kind of think of like a seesaw or teeter-totter, wherever you call it. Okay, where the second class lever, you're going to put the load in the middle, the effort on one side, and the fulcrum on the other side. So whenever I draw an example, I'll show you on my whiteboard here. So the paragraph that talks about the first class levers, you should have a first class lever drawn beside it if you have it printed out. Okay, so first class looks like this. So this triangle is my fulcrum. Okay, and then I put the load over here and the effort over here. You could even put an F for fulcrum if you wanted to do that. So that's what a first class lever looks like. And I was telling you about that. Okay, second class has the load in the middle. The load is between the effort and the fulcrum. Okay, so it's kind of like this. And we will talk about some examples so you know what I mean. If you're thinking to yourself, what does she mean the fulcrum is at the end? That doesn't make any sense. But I will give you some examples and then it'll make a lot more sense what a second class one is. Okay, so if you just want to draw that where the load is between the effort and the fulcrum, that way you remember that's a second class lever. Okay, so now you can see examples on page 7. So a wheelbarrow, if you think about a wheelbarrow, okay, your effort is the handles, right? The load goes in the middle of the wheelbarrow. The fulcrum is where it touches the ground. So in a wheelbarrow, example, the load is between the effort and the fulcrum. So your effort is where you hold the handles. I don't know how many of you have carried a wheelbarrow before, but basically it's got this big wheel on the end. You lift up the load, you put stuff in the middle, you can put rocks and carry it around your yard and that kind of stuff. But it's got two handles you lift up. The load goes in the middle, and then the fulcrum is the point that touches the ground that you have to lift up and roll to move the load. Okay, so in your picture, if you have it printed out, you can label the pieces of the wheelbarrow so you understand the different parts. Okay, so the load is the wood inside the wheelbarrow, so you can put an L. Okay, or this says use a blue colored pencil to shade the load. You can just put an L so you remember it's load. The effort's the end of the handles, so you can put an E above the handles. Then the fulcrum is at the wheel. So you can put an F at the wheel or draw a triangle like I showed you in my example when I drew the fulcrum. Okay, so another example of a second class lever is a paper cutter. So probably not a lot of you have used paper cutters before. As teachers, we use them all the time. So basically it's a gigantic board. It's a wooden board, and it's got this huge blade attached to the side of it. And it's got this point that's fixed, that's the fulcrum, and that point is attached to the wooden board. And you lift this gigantic knife basically up, you put the paper underneath, you slice it down, and it gives it a nice clean slice. That's why it's easier to do than just scissors, and it's much faster. So that's why teachers use them all the time. If we have booklets to make or something like that, we just put them in the paper cutter. It's quick and easy. But basically, it's kind of like a wheelbarrow. It's a second class lever. That fulcrum is where it attaches to the wooden board. Okay. The effort is you're lifting up on the handle, and the load, in this case, is the paper that goes underneath. Okay. So if you want to label that on your picture, if you have it printed out, just put F for fulcrum or draw a little triangle where it attaches to the board. Load is the paper underneath. Effort is the handle that you lift up. Okay. So the long handle of the paper cutter allows to use less force to cut many sheets of paper at the same time. So if you've ever tried to cut through like 10 sheets of paper at the same time with some scissors, it takes a lot more effort than if you just slide it in there in the wood, chop it down with the big knife that's on the paper cutter. Okay. So that is the paper cutter. And then the third picture is a nutcracker. Okay. And you might think of like the giant soldier looking nutcrackers. Those work too. Or you can just use a regular hand nutcracker. I'm pretty sure your picture shows the hand one. But how that works is it lifts up like this. You put your load in between the nut, you crank it down, and it cracks the nut. So the fulcrum is where they're attached. Okay, they're attached at the end. Your effort is the handle that you're lifting up, and the load is the nut that you're cracking. Okay, so if you have it printed out, you can also label that. So like I said, the fulcrum, where the two handles are joined, so you put a triangle or put an F for fulcrum. The load is the nut that goes between the fulcrum and the effort is the handles, the end of the handles. Okay. So remember, less effort is needed if you're at the ends of the handles, okay? Because you have more distance, so you need less effort. Remember, just like we talked about the inclined plane. Okay, and then after you have that labeled and all of your highlighting is done, there is a slideshow also that shows you some second class levers and demonstrates those as well. So I will put the link to the slideshow and give you the username and the password, and you can go watch that. And then I will post the lesson 86 review on Google Classroom for you to do as well. See you next time.